Right, so let's turn to this now. The National Assembly has passed the Electricity Regulation Amendment Bill. The draft law makes provision for a state-owned transmission system operator to be established. Experts say the move will help end load shedding and accelerate the just energy transition. Joining us now for more broader of a discussion on this topic is Professor Sampson Mamphweli, and as well as the chairperson of the Portfolio Committee on Energy and Mineral Resources Portfolio Committee there. That is Sahlulele Luzipo. You can weigh in tonight on the conversation on 072-110-5584. Drop us an X at Newzroom 405. Good to have you both, and thank you very much for coming on this evening. You are seemingly on two sides in as far as this amendment is concerned. There are those who are saying this is an amendment that seeks to create a new state-owned entity, the transmission system operator. Basically what they're saying, it makes the entity that will now be responsible to open the market, or to have an open market platform possible to be established, to allow a competitive trading of electricity. That's one aspect of it. There are others then who look at it and say, no, this is a privatization of electricity generation in the country. I know what the Portfolio Committee chair will say, because these are people in direct formulation of this bill. But from somebody who's watching from outside, Prof, let me start with you. What do you think is the sole aim of this bill?
Yeah, thanks, Thabo. So the bill seeks to achieve mainly three things in my view. The first one is to introduce competition. The second one is to secure energy supply. And the third one is to modernize the electricity sector, which then leads to basically the unbundling of Eskom, doing away with the vertically integrated system that we had, and then opening up the electricity market. And by doing so, you then introduce competition. And based on the fact that there's now competition, it can then result in lower electricity costs. So that's basically what the bill seeks to achieve. And I've heard from the time that this bill was contemplated from others who were saying this is privatization of the electricity market, or the electricity sector, or Eskom in general. The bill is quite clear on that. It's not privatization. The creation of the three entities, transmission, generation, as well as your distribution, they will be under a state holding company. So there's nothing private about a state holding company. The private part comes, the privatization part, or the private participation part, comes from the fact that we have now independent power producers coming in to produce electricity and having access to the electricity grid, where they can then wheel power to their customers, who could be anywhere around the country. And in other cases, those customers will not necessarily be government. In certain cases, the main customer will still be government through Eskom, where we will be running what we call the public procurement process, which is the REAP program that is run through the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy. So this bill basically brings in new role players, or more role players, into the picture, and then it introduces competition. It's good for the country, in my view. And we will have sustainable supply of electricity, because we will have many sources of electricity, as opposed to having only Eskom as the only source of electricity that we have in the country.
Chairperson, in what world have you seen this model of the liberalization, as the Prof puts it, of the energy market? Others are saying, what's wrong with this government? It came in, it had a properly functioning Eskom that was generating revenue and doing well, one of the leading utilities, providers of electricity in the world. right? And you broke it, and now you are saying, no, we want to stop this existing monopoly of this thing and open the markets and get more participants. Where are you seeing this model, and where is it coming from?
Look, good evening to you, TM, and the Prof. You should have warned me that I'm coming with the most learned person, so that I prepare my English well for the Prof. They usually say the Prof might correct my English before he corrects what I'm saying. Look, on a serious note, look, Tim, I think let's not underestimate the capacity of South Africans to think. One of the things, just to divert a bit, I always complain, because I also deal with minerals, is the fact that value addition in our mineral wealth must be determined somewhere else. We must be able to find and give value addition to any matter that will benefit the people of South Africa, and therefore become trendsetters. I don't want to sit here in the tiny corner of Africa and start to do the common thing of people, even if that would have influenced decisions that we are making. I don't want to sit here and borrow something from the European, which is commonly what we always do. So if you want me, where did we get this model? We got it on the basis that we were going around even consulting with our own people. We got from the fact that we have experienced all these issues that relate to the hardships that comes with issues of electricity scarcity and sustainability. Let me just raise one issue. I know the intention of those who raise this question is not a bad one. They say it in good sense. I find it very odd, though. I had grew up in my younger ages in the Eastern Cape, in Port Elizabeth, and my rural towns of Pedi, which is in Ngusha. I had never seen electricity until I left the Eastern Cape. Electricity, if you go even now, the defunct power station is right in KwaZakele. They call it essays in KwaZakele. Electricity used to go and flow across those townships and go to the affluent areas, which were historically those days areas that were predominantly for white people. I think we must then acknowledge that with the new dispensation that came in 1994, it talked to the expansion of the electricity demand, because now you did not only come about bringing new development, you needed to address the historical imbalances, including access to electricity. So when you started to light the townships and everything, so that at 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock you don't go clean the glasses for the lights that were then at those days in the township. So I think the issue of electricity scarcity must also be associated with the demand that came with development and redressing what has been historically disadvantaging decisions that were taken by the previous government. Yeah. That is why in the process of consultation, for instance, with our communities, one of the things that they were saying in public hearings was that one of the things that must be linked to electricity sustainability and electricity availability is that as you do development, electricity must also be considered as part of the cluster demands that must be there as you build the houses. For an example, if you talk about now building your RDP houses, the issue says consider also having basic minimum of access to electricity. For an example, you may consider having solar panels that are part of the human settlement development decisions that are taken. So I don't want us to narrow down the issue that the ESCOM at that time was the best. Yes, we can't deny that it was the best utility, but as we always say, anything that is best and is not addressing the interest, needs, and demands of the majority, then that bestness is as good as for publicity reasons. It is not as good as for consumption and benefit of those who are in total demands and need of such.
So you are correct to say, of course, the question is being asked because where the question is leading is that this thing of the liberalization of energy markets comes from Europe. It's fairly new. Others are saying it started in 1996. So it's a very new development to say, no, we are trying to get rid of the gatekeepers of the grid to enable more people to come in. But what is the legal basis for doing it?
Look, I wouldn't know whether I'm answering properly your question earlier in terms of the legal basis. You remember, one of the things that in the process of the current challenges that we are faced with as far as electricity is concerned, and for me, I would argue, I don't want to reduce everything to load shedding because there could be other bigger issues that are coming. So in the process of making legislation, it must be able to stand the test of time. You don't make the legislation only to respond to a current crisis. You make the legislation in order to be sustainable. So the legal basis of such is to make sure that we address some of the experiences that we are having of the past. We also are able to make sure that our objective looks much more forward than what we have in front of our eyes. So in my view, when it comes to issues, for an example, of electricity regulations and related matters, we then need to make sure that there is a basic foundation that is able to support the needs and demands and also the objectives of the state in addressing those particular demands. So I would say the legal basis of doing so is on the basis that there is demand and there is a need to redress and address some of these shortfalls that were there, including, amongst other issues, also to make sure that the new entrants in the sector, in the electricity sector, whether you talk about your independent power producers, they need, and this is where I have a problem, and I said to people, I've tried, I worked on the bill, I've said, please show me an area or a clause in the bill, in the amendment, that talks about privatization. I think there are two things you must separate. There is a difference between independence and privatization. I think what they call now in terms of the TSO is that it should be an independent entity. And I won't mention, but we do have, for example, a broadcaster that is an independent broadcaster. And there's nothing, no one complains about it on how it is operating. So there are many bases that you can use to make a legal justification on why such intervention have to be made.
But I think largely the private part comes in the fact that many believe that for example, Eskom could start its own IPP program. It doesn't need to have people coming from the outside to come in and sell it IPPs at exorbitant prices. That's where the argument of the privatization coming from. You say, if you want to create a system where you have your own clean energy in the country, why doesn't Eskom have its own farms and its hydro farms and whatever else that needs to happen?
No, Chair. There is nothing in the bill that says Eskom can't. Let's start there. There is nothing that says Eskom can't. There is nothing that says the TSO can't. But let's address this issue. So we must accept one thing, and I think I know people may take offense to this thing. The reality is that there is a role that the private sector has to play. And people have argued that one of the things that we are not doing in South Africa is to discipline capital. When you make a legislation, for an example, that says a regulator has got amongst other regulatory responsibilities that it has, is to set and approve prices. So the question of it currently, as far as I know, that has been one of the issues that has been complained about. That when you look at the cost implications of the independent power producers, they have got unlimited, and the cost to Eskom is too much. Now we then say, as part of the regulatory regime, we must allow the regulator to set and approve prices. The issue then is not about privatization. The question will be, will that regulator be able to do that work effectively? I think it's not a policy matter, that one. That's a matter then that will require oversight on that independent regulator, whether it does perform that work. So I wouldn't agree with the fact that when you say a TSO will be a state-owned entity, you then come and say, if you then allow the participation of the independent power producers instead of ESCOM generating through electricity through its own independent power producers, then I think we are fudging issues. As far as I understand, that process on its own is regulated, including participation of the private sector in relation to electricity generation, transmission, and distribution. That is also a subject of regulation.
Back live tonight here on In Focus, Electricity Regulation Amendment Bill under discussion, and now having been given a sign-off by the National Assembly, with the Democratic Alliance supporting it. So for the EFF, of course, saying they will support nothing that has to do with the privatization of state-owned entities. Professor Sampson Mamphweli is with us, who's with the Energy Secretariat, head of the South African National Energy Development Institute. We also have the Mineral Resources and Energy Portfolio Committee Chairperson, Sahlulele Luzipo. Prof, let me come back to you. First they're saying that the unbundling thereof, as we speak of it, is really superficial, in the sense that it is accounting unbundling. And if we look at the example that took place in Europe, when they did that accounting unbundling, where the TSO is still the holding company, but you've got these various separate companies, ultimately it did not create a competitive market.
Thabo, maybe quickly let me deal with the price part and then come to that question. And I want to deal with this because there's a lot of misconception about the pricing out there. So when we started with the Renewable Energy Independent Power Producers Program, we had to work the price of renewable energy into the existing ESCOM tariffs, basically subsidizing renewable energy. And that's what many countries did globally for them to establish the market, because at that particular point in time, we didn't have the market. And the idea was that we will then reap the benefit going forward, because then when the market is established, then we'll have the benefit of competition, and then we will see the prices of renewable energy in the program going down, which is exactly what happened, and we've got numbers to show. So that part, when people talk, they need to go back into the history of what happened and what advantages we get from that particular process. As things stand, we're benefiting a lot from cheap renewable energy because we invested, basically we've paid our school fees. And going forward, we just need to do what government is doing through this unbundling of ESCOM and through this particular bill. Coming to what you've asked, there are very good examples globally where unbundling has worked. China is one of those particular examples. South Africa is doing it because of some of the challenges that we face. So when we have these three companies, there will be independent companies in line with the Companies Act. And I liked the question that you asked around the legal implications. So legally, whatever we do as South Africa, it needs to be within the provisions of the law. And the apex law is our constitution, followed by the various legislative prescripts. And in this particular case, we're looking at the Electricity Regulation Act of 2006. But going back to the history of electricity generation, IPPs were actually the ones who started producing electricity in South Africa and Kimberley to power the mining sector as well. But then the nation took a decision to say we need to expropriate these efforts because electricity is a national kind of a thing, which is for public good. And I think the Honorable Luzipo went through the details of how some of us did not have access to electricity pre-1994 and how most of us have access to electricity today, and which is partly the challenge that we have in terms of load shedding. Now, coming to the three companies under a one holding company, you will recall that in terms of the Companies Act, even though the holding company will still be Eskom Holding, the three companies are still independent. They still have their own boards. They still run their own operations. They still have their own financials that they need to report to the nation. So at that level, at the level of the holding companies, it's simply a holding company and nothing more than that. So we're not basically unbundling and then it remains the same. It doesn't remain the same in terms of the operations. It doesn't remain the same in terms of the admin part of things. And also, when Eskom Transmission operates its business, it's not impacted by Eskom Distribution or Eskom Generation. It runs its own affairs independent of those. And when they purchase the electricity, they can purchase electricity from Eskom Generation, they can purchase electricity from IPPs. We can get the benefit of IPPs competing also with Eskom, because this has also been another issue. Looking at the history of tariffs, for instance, the Eskom tariffs are not cost reflective. And I like the fact that the bill in this particular case, it gives NERSA that opportunity to set the tariffs, but it also appreciates the fact that we could gain in terms of the lower tariffs that may come from competition. And where such happens, the bill will allow the licensees to proceed with that particular price. But even in setting the prices, the NERSA, in terms of the bill, they need to also take into consideration the cost of generation and the minimum allowable profit. And we're talking about minimum allowable profit, which is where the public gets protected. Where NERSA set the target, the profit is not going to be inflated. It's going to be the minimum that the licensees could get. So the bill in many ways is very much pro the public and pro the poor in this particular case as well.
Yeah. Chairperson, they say it's never. Commercial activities typically are never pro the poor. They are usually in the hands of a few large companies. So in reality, there is no such a thing as a perfect competition. It doesn't exist. So how does the bill guarantee that it's not only a handful of large companies who can afford this infrastructure? Because the infrastructure, I mean, even as we speak, if you look at bid window 6 and all the other bid windows, just to be able to reach completion and to start building, there's a lot of investment that would need to go in there.
That is a side issue. My uncle once said, if you don't listen to me, just listen to my son, my kids talking to God. Now, if people can't believe us, I'll just say, at least they must listen to the Prof and hear what the Prof is saying, in echoing what we're saying. Look, let's accept one thing. It depends. I don't want to enter an ideological debate in terms of the social systems and whether you can get a perfect system even if you choose one of the theories of social social systems. The point is here, the system is worse now than what is being proposed. Why do I say so? Even when you remain and you retain Eskom, let's just deal with the current situation. People must not make as if people are happy with the prices of Eskom. Just Eskom now is talking about the increase in prices. So we want to suggest and say this is the current system that we have is a perfect one. And I think the Prof is correct when he says, now look at the regulatory framework. To what extent it also seeks to address the interest of the poor, even from private generators and from private transmitters or distributors. So the point there for TM is that I can't sit here and say there's a perfect social system. If you ask people when you go to the retail industry, they will still complain about the cost of living, the issues that relate to food production and so forth. So we are dealing and managing a system that we hope it will work for the better of the people of South Africa.
Right.
And one thing you cannot then guarantee in a system where there is an end user, there is a customer, you can't then say that customer will be satisfied in spending money. I have to see somebody who say, for an example, the best price is this one, the best tariffs will be this one. The point is that we are saying, with the proposed amendments now to the Act, for an example, let's take a simple thing. Initially, you did not have a generation of electricity for self-use. It then says municipality currently can generate electricity for self-use. The only thing that they need to do is to register. It is not to apply, it's to register. And what is accrued in that generation of electricity can still be sold back to Eskom, and then Eskom can put that. So I think for me, the interventions that have been made in relation to such proposals seeks to exactly to address some of the weaknesses in the current structure of electricity.
So I'm glad you're also bringing up the question of the regulator, the regulating institution playing a key role, because that's where I'm going. I want to ask the question because we can't function on we hope that it will be better, because we've learned, for example, employment equity. You can't hope that companies are going to adhere, right, to the employment equity ratio. So I'm saying in this bill and the powers that are given, at least to even the regulator, how do we ensure that the regulator is able to deal with the so-called concentration ratio so that it doesn't fall on the favor of a few large companies?
My first thing, Tim, I always raise this thing, is that if we deal with policy, let's deal with policy. If we deal with weaknesses on policy implementation, that's a completely separate matter. The issue here is that we seek to empower the regulator to perform its duties and ensure that it protects the interest of South Africans, including those that are at the lower level of social beneficiation. So I would argue only on one thing, that in some areas, obviously it will be, it will be an oversight on the part of those who are supposed to keep an eye of accountability to such institutions. All what we are doing here now, if you take, I don't think somebody can stand up and argue very strongly and say employment equity as a policy was wrong. The fact that companies do not comply, it is precisely the responsibility of those who must ensure that that is being enforced and there is compliance. So we can then attack the existence of that legislation or that policy on the basis that not enough is being done. Let's deal now with the element where, in inverted commas, maybe there are people who are not performing to the optimal on what they are supposed to do. Instrument that must deal with those who are failing to do their work or to ensure that what is supposed to be done is done. Then those instruments must kick in. In this arrangement that we are talking about, we are saying when we set up this legislation, we expect exactly that the regulator must go to those concentrated areas and be able to ensure that it does not only do regulation or setting up, but also it protects the general interest of those who may be on the receiving end of the high cost of electricity and other related situations, whether it's tariffs and so forth, including, by the way, management and regulation of the trade arrangements that will be taking place at every different level. So there is a lot that the regulator has given powers, for an example, individual would destroy or damage electricity infrastructure. If they don't do that, then somebody who has got a responsibility to make sure and monitor that the regulator performs that duty, is that person must also be held accountable for not performing their job.
Yeah. Prof, let's touch on that because it's I suppose, quite important, this question of infrastructure, because it seemingly is a limiting factor, at least everywhere else in the world. I don't see it being any different in South Africa. You can liberalize the market as far as generation is concerned various companies can generate. Local municipalities now are able to generate a little bit more than they used to just by merely getting a license. And maybe you can deal with the question of retail companies as well. But distribution, the transmission network itself, lends itself to becoming a natural monopoly because of just the way that it is currently built and the way that it is set up. How is that going to be regulated within this bill?
Yeah, so Thabo, let me deal with this and start by saying that advanced societies have made it through what we call the triple helix model. And what the triple helix model calls for, it calls for the public-private participation working together with the community. And this is what I'm seeing. So the role of the public sector is basically to create an enabling environment for the private sector to thrive, and then the country takes advantage of the liquidity of the private sector to develop. That's the basic principles of the triple helix model. And then people then get jobs and all other things flow from that particular model. That's why we always talk about foreign direct investments and as well as local investments. So in the IPP space, for instance, if you look at all the bid windows, the recent bid windows, most of the money that's being invested in those companies that were bidding were in partnership with local DFIs, like your DBSA and your IDC. In some bid windows, if you go deep and analyze, you'll find that the local DFIs have invested more than 50% of the cash. And that money, in some cases, you're looking at equity that is being injected for local people to have local ownership. Now, in the previous models, there's no single power station that I know where the community has got shares. And the new model, if you look at the REAP program, we've got 5% that goes to the local communities. That is community ownership. That speaks to the triple helix model. You've got the private sector coming with liquidity, with the liquid cash. And then you've got government creating an enabling environment for those projects to thrive. Now, coming to the issue of the transmission grid. Yes, the transmission grid is a challenge, and the challenge comes because most of our coal assets are sitting, up north and also in Mpumalanga region and all that. And our electricity market was built in terms of the generation based on where the most resource was, because the nearer the resource, the more economic sense it makes. Now, with the renewable energy program, we have most of the resources sitting in the Northern Cape, Eastern Cape, and Western Cape. And that's where most of the renewable energy projects are building, because it makes economic sense. So the projects in Limpopo, for instance, or Northwest or Mpumalanga can't compete with the projects in those provinces that I've mentioned because of the resources, the differences in the resources. Now, that brings in the issue of the grid constraints, because then the more you build in an area that was not strengthened in terms of the grid capacity, because of the resource that we were using in the past, the more you constrain the particular grid. And what I understand now is that a national government through the Minister of Electricity is busy working on a grid expansion plan, working together with Eskom. They already know that we need to build about 14,000 kilometers of grid. Eskom has talked about building about 4,000 kilometers of grid in the midterm, and the rest, the Minister of Electricity is busy working on that. One of the things that I expect would happen is, again, going back to the triple helix model. of saying what can we do, what can we get from the public sector, because we must never forget that the private sector thrives based on what government does. If you go elsewhere in Africa, you'll see that the private sector is struggling because of the policy uncertainties and things like that. We come to South Africa, we don't have that because we have a government that is ensuring that the private sector thrives. So when we ensure that the private sector thrives, and we have challenges that where we can bring in the liquidity from the private sector, we must not shy away from doing it. We must go there because they are thriving because of our own government policies. They are thriving because of our own communities. What we need to do when we do that, we need to then ensure that we protect the fiscus, we protect the public. Now, in terms of the transmission plan, what I expect is that we will have something like the build, operate and transfer model, where the private sector comes on board and provides the financial liquidity to build the transmission lines, operate them for a particular period, and then hand over the assets to the nation through Eskom. And then we can have the benefit of using those assets for 10 to 15 years without paying the private sector. And in all these models, at the end of the day, it is the nation that benefits working together with the private sector.
Chairperson, final words, quick 2 minutes to wrap up. But does this then open a way for more off-grid solutions? Are we going to see more off-grid solutions gaining relevance? Now, others are saying, in a developing country such as South Africa, why would you want to lose some of your big spenders, like your mining companies, who will then now have this freedom to go off-grid? It's particularly controversial. But does this allow for that now, where you can have separate companies that are operating?
Look, like I've stated, is that all those issues are catered for, because they will still have what one has talked about, the regulatory capacity of the regulator to make specific regulation as far as price setting and regulation and approval is concerned. So will be the case with tariffs. In terms of what you are raising in relation to the mining companies, I think there are things that must also be able to take into consideration. That is not only the off-grid benefits or losses. The issue is that we must balance that with what one would say are the benefits of having a thriving mining industry, that out of its generated outputs, one, it will improve the benefit for communities in terms of what they are supposed to accrue. It will also improve the benefit of what the state will get in returns. So it is not only a question of you give and you get. It will also be what are the off benefits even beyond electricity. So if we then enable the industry to be able to generate electricity so that it does not have blockages. I always raise and say, if you want to grow the economy, you need to address three issues. Two of those will fall under energy. If you address the issue of electricity, surely you will have the economy growing. If you address the issue of the fuel prices, surely you will have your that. If you address the issue of logistics. So I don't think the solution should only be in exchange on the basis of prices and other things. It will also be, does this at the ultimate end benefit the economy of this country? Does this yield results that will benefit South Africans in totality? Does this help to improve the nature and the manner in which we do trade? So I would always say that must also be seen as part of a development of a comprehensive investment strategy that should include all these three major issues that I've raised, which to me remain a base into which we grow our economy, into which we will also be able to address and redress some of the challenges that we are having, whether it's unemployment, issues of inequalities, issues that relate to a poverty that our communities that are are confronted with. So I looked at it not narrowly on the basis of what will be the issues of grid and so forth. I look at it that it will help in injecting a capacity of those particular institutions, including the mining industry and other manufacturing, to build enough capacity for the manufacturing industry. So that is how, for me, I would be looking at this thing, that it's not just narrowing down. My last point is that I think South Africa is, to some degree, when we are confronted with issues, and I like what the Prof said, we always maintain one principle. When you address your issues that you make as interventions, must be sustainable, must be long-term, and must create investment confidence. And you can only do that if you've got what people would say, to create certainty in the industry and in the market. And I think that's what this bill seeks to do. Thank you very much.
I appreciate you both. Thank you very much for coming on. Professor Sampson Mamphweli, the Energy Secretariat Head at the South African National Energy Development Institute, Mineral Resources and Energy Portfolio Committee Chairperson, Sahlulele Luzipo.